Live from VRChat, it's the Blue Room, virtual reality's only game development talk show. Now put your hands together for our live guests and our hosts. Here they are.
Thank you for joining us for the Blue Room. This is Studio Blue's talk show where we invite members of our community to join us for a conversation topic, and we also chat with your audience.
That is right. All right. Good to hear. Good to hear. So we have got two new guests with us. Well, they are actually recurring guests. It's been a while since we've done the Blue Room. Let me go ahead and introduce them, and then they can introduce themselves. We have Arcfinder and AOD. Go ahead and introduce yourselves, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arcfinder. I'm the lead developer of Eternal Remnant. I like games and story, and I love discussions around storytelling in games.
Okay.
My name is AOD, and I do all kinds of things creatively, but my main passion is storytelling, and I've done novels, a manga, and I am working on 2 indie RPGs, Shattered Realms, Mortal Tale, and Tears of Morgana.
Yeah. We have our two guests with us today talking about the topic of, as you can see up there, environmental storytelling. And if you're new to the Blue Room, all we're really going to do is just kind of have a discussion. It's just, a talk show. And we want our guests to make sure they kind of bring in their experiences working on their games. And I would like to start with that. When you two are creating your games, where you're at in the process, how much has environmental storytelling... Well, you know what? Let's just start off with a definition. Environmental storytelling is, well, using the environment to enhance your narrative. Obviously, we've talked about that. So when you're doing that, when you're making your designs, where you're at right now, how much have you put environmental storytelling into where you're currently at with Eternal Remnant, Tears of Morgana?
So in the demo of Eternal Remnant, I'd say that the environmental storytelling is, as a designer and as a storyteller, I think it's easier because there are more human elements. So if you just think about taking a environment with, with human elements in it, like a house and like a heart and things that general humans revolve around, and then you take like a situation where you've got just a forest and there's not many human elements to it. It's way easier to tell stories where it looks lived in and where there are actual human elements. And I think the demo of Eternal Remnant has more of that. And then it's been trickier for me to manage in some of the other areas. And after you mentioned this was the topic of conversation still, I've been rethinking about how to introduce more environmental storytelling into some of the more desolate areas of the game.
Oh, nice. So just bringing this up kind of sparked in your mind how I can improve or increase the use of environmental storytelling in your game.
Yeah, because I went and thought about other games that do it, and I thought about how they do it, and I just feel like there's a little bit more to give in that area. Mm-hmm. So, they don't have to be major changes or big changes because a lot of good environmental storytelling is subtle anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's just about sort of going over the areas, rethinking, have I got the most out of what I can tell thematically about this area in the game as a whole as well.
Yeah, absolutely. AOD, what about you? Where you're at with Tears of Morgana, how has environmental storytelling been playing, a part in it?
I would say that a lot more of the storytelling with Tears of Morgana has been more overt. But I know in my main project, Shattered Realms, that one, I have taken into consideration certain things like the design of a village. You would expect it to look a certain way when it's lived in and orderly, but what about when there's a monster attack and people are trying to defend themselves and then all the people are gone and you're wandering through what's left? you'll see things that aren't normally there, like objects placed in the way of the invaders, and so on and so forth. And I try and always incorporate little details like that. Or think about little ways I can tell stories without direct dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've talked about in the past, both in our podcasts and in our creator classrooms, and pretty much all of our streams, that when you want to bring it down to its base level, environmental storytelling is when the player would walk into an area and go, what happened here? Kind of to get that question moving in their mind. And it seems like you guys have pretty much hit on that. Like you said, thematically is a really good example too, because, walking into a bedroom and seeing that the bed is unmade is going to invoke an entire different line of thought than if there's a large claymore sticking out of the mattress. I know that's an extreme example, but it's a good for instance. So when you say thematically, how does that get you, expand on that if you would.
So I would say that I've seen a lot of different ways how people structure what the term environmental storytelling, and you could say there's like your micro levels, which is in Fallout or something like that. You might go into a room and there's there's a funny way that a skeleton's positioned, and it would infer some kind of narrative meaning behind like how that person died in the apocalypse, or
right.
or what was happening just before the bombs went off, and that kind of thing.
Right.
And there are small things like that can be funny, or they can be tragic, or they can be mysterious. And then there's sort of your larger macro stuff, which might be your architecture, your map design layout of any particular area, and also just geopolitically and geographically, where are my hubs located in this world? What is the lore of my world, and where are things placed, and how do these kind of play off of each other in terms of social cultures and things like that. If you want to go that big, obviously not all stories are that big, but yeah.
Well, right. Absolutely. Teal, you've always said, whenever you've talked either about level design or your own personal experiences, that to you, environmental storytelling is one of the most powerful devices that a game developer can use. Well, what is that impact to you, both as a player and as a developer? Where does environmental storytelling fit in, other than the blanket statement of how powerful it is?
Well, it helps to tell your narrative. For instance, I'm going to use the example of Fallout 4. Okay. Because that's what I've been playing recently. Okay. So environmental storytelling for me is it drives a narrative forward. And as you guys said, the certain placement of objects in a room, it tells you something. Most notably in the Fallout series, you have all these different skeletons. And skeletons are doing things in the room. Some of them are in the bed together. Some of them are in a bathtub, that sort of thing. And you can surmise what these people's last few minutes on this earth were. And also, there's journals left around, people's diaries or computer terminals that you can hack and read stuff that happened in the past, different people's entries or news stories or that sort of thing. So you get an idea of what the state of the world was before the bombs dropped. And also just you can follow some of the it's really brilliant, I think, that you can actually tell an entire story that happened in the past through like computer terminals and stuff. And so getting back to your question, for me, environmental storytelling is a narrative, and it drives your main story forward because it either fills in the blanks or it leads you to a new point of inquiry in your current main quest.
Yeah, and clearly the original release of Fallout 76 relied completely on, things within the environment, the way the scenes were laid out, along with log files to tell its story. Until they brought in NPCs, that was the only way the narrative came out. I am definitely, in the way that I view things, very much like AOD, where I do try to use, or Arcfinder actually, less is more. I try not to rely on the log files, the journals. However, when I view a scene, if I'm going to put in a log file or a journal entry, it has to directly maintain that question of what happened here. Like a note that is on a dead body that says "I'm sorry" can have an extremely strong emotional punch, in my opinion, an even stronger punch than a journal that expresses remorse. Now, granted, the journal that expresses remorse is going to give you the information you need to continue the game, especially if it's a very narrative-driven game that requires, as Teal was saying, as Ark was saying, pointing the player in a direction. But, for me, I try to weigh the difference. Am I trying to have a strong emotional punch to the player, or am I trying to bring them to their next goal point? And when I look at an environment, I want to have the emotional impact first, and then I want to drive the player towards their next goal. That's how I approach it.
Well, that's a really good point. You want to have the emotion and then point to the next goal. That ties in with what Ark was saying about don't overuse your environmental elements, because you overuse it and you lose that emotional impact, definitely, and introduce player fatigue, reading fatigue.
Right.
Emotional stuff
fatigue.
That they're reading.
Yeah.
Emotional fatigue. So there is kind of a balance here with environmental storytelling versus directly talking to somebody.
Yeah.
Or doing something yourself as the player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like how you said it numbs the player too. It's interesting because given what the Studio Blue community is with a Danganronpa game, Danganronpa, for example, uses that pink, high pink color for blood. And it's like Sin City. Sin City does that really well, although Sin City is a movie. So when you walk into a murder scene in Danganronpa and you see like blood splattered on the wall, it's just pink. That, to me, actually helped reduce the amount of fatigue to seeing how horrible something is. So it doesn't just have the effect of lessening the gore level, but it also keeps me from getting fatigued whenever I see something really horrific. Because I'm going to be honest, even in a horror game, if I'm constantly walking into rooms and seeing blood and guts caked all over the wall, it's going to lose its impact on me extremely fast. And instead of going, what happened here, I want to be like, okay, more guts, and it doesn't have that impact anymore.
Yeah.
The lore of diminishing returns, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The first time you walk into a murder scene in a game, it's gonna be, oh, that's horrible. The 17th time you walk into the same kind of murder scene, at that point you're just looking, so okay, where's the clue so I can continue the game? I'm done with this.
Yeah. You don't care who it is that's laid out there or why.
Right.
You just want to get through whatever the scenario is and move on to your next objective. Yeah.
And with the law of diminishing returns and what you just said, let's say that 17th time is somebody, the character, and you, the player, should be really close to. Instead of having a truly emotional moment for both for the player's going to go, oh, that sucks. All right, well, let's just get this done, which would be a complete missed opportunity. Which kind of brings me to a question to all of you, especially to our two guests here. When you're creating an emotional scene and you're using environmental storytelling, what is the first thing you look at? Do you look at the emotion you're trying to invoke, or the scene, the story, the narrative of the scene you're trying to tell, or what?
I think, first of all, I want to determine what I want the objective of the particular area to be. So let's say, I think an RPG is a bit more vague because there's not clear start and end points all the time. But if we were to take level-based game, or a game clearly separated by area, I would say, what do I want the player to feel in this area? And that would be on one side of the table, and on the other side of the table, what is the key information that needs to be delivered in this area? So I would say, okay, well, the emotion is this. How do I blend this with the information as seamlessly as possible, so that it doesn't feel too on the nose, or it's delivered mostly without dialogue or writing, and perhaps delivered visually, because that's always a strong one. And you can do little things like, if I want the player to feel isolated, maybe this area is going to be based in like a wide open space. Maybe the colors are a little bit muted and desaturated. Or if I want the player to feel like a strong sense of family connection or something like that, well, maybe the house is a little bit cozier. Maybe there's like more warmer tones to it. Maybe the area is not enclosed, but is a little bit more closer together to draw those connections between characters and family unit and stuff just a little bit closer together. So there's ways to both visually and I'd say thematically, but even with the awareness of space and color to make players feel a certain thing. And I think that's where I want to get to. But where I would start would be just, what do I want the player to feel, and what's like the key information that needs to be provided.
Right.
And then you go to, you can go beyond that, and you find the minutia in it. But starting with those two areas for me,
okay,
it works well.
Yeah, AOD. What about you?
So whenever I'm thinking about an emotional scene, in the context of environmental storytelling, I tend to think about, like he was mentioning a lot, kind of the tones and color tones and whatnot is the important thing. Like, if you have like a brightly warm environment and you're trying to make someone really sad, you're starting to face an uphill battle. I mean, you can do it. It's just you need to do it properly in that kind of setting.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, though, that's kind of the stormy, rainy trope.
Right.
If you're
right.
And you can absolutely, oh look, it's raining, but you can totally do without the rain.
Well,
but
because rain can be just as cozy. Like, you can have a rainy sequence, and if you use the right colors, or like a fireplace or something, I mean, it can be just as cozy. It could be cozy enough to where the player's like, oh, we're a little tired, especially in VR.
But another thing that I think about, and I think about this kind of like at the start of any scene that I am doing, I'm thinking about what music selection I want, because as someone who's obsessed with video game music and listens to it more than he does the radio, music choice is everything to me, and I get very finicky about what music is playing in what scene. And if I don't have enough music to choose from, it gets the bother me.
Gotcha.
Oh man, can we talk about that for a sec?
Absolutely.
Because
I was gonna.
Yes. This is a really good point. Yeah. Sometimes, as primarily the writer and designer, like I don't have limitless resources at my disposal, so you have to go and find the music a lot of the time, and or you might commission it. But in for those ones that that you go and source from somewhere, you might spend hours sifting through music for a particular scene, and if the more specific your scene and the more complicated it is, the more specific a piece of music you need, and that can take such a long time. So I fully empathize with that plight. Yeah.
Absolutely. It cannot be overstated how important the aural element of a game is, not just music, but sound design in general. Sound effects, ambient effects, they're all super important, and I'm glad that AOD brought that up, because while we're going to focus on visual, we're going to focus on item placement, we're going to focus on written things, Good sound can tell a story that, if it's done correctly, can make the visual elements secondary to it. So that was a really good point you brought up there, AOD. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, to kind of go back to something that Ark was saying, and I want to ask Teal this, the color theory, using the color elements, where does that fit into the design of a scene, an environmental scene for yourself?
Well, for me, it's one of the core components. In order to express the emotion of a scene, I do use color. I use color and to some extent light, lighting as well, color and lighting, to set the atmosphere for the scene. So if I want to evoke sadness, for example, there's just something very sad when you walk into a room and there's just something sad going on, then I'm going to use a lot of blues and grays and muted tones. And, you know, lighting, I can't emphasize enough how important lighting is for any scene, but especially when you're wanting to tell something just visually without having to use a single word of dialogue. There's nothing more effective than walking into a cave and there's a single shaft of sunlight and it's shining on a particular area. Of course, you're going to be drawn to that area.
Right, like the infamous, not a cave, but a forest. The infamous first time you approach the Master Sword in the earlier Zelda games, and there's that single shaft of light in the dark forest, and there's the Master Sword and its stone. You know that's important. You don't even have to be told that's important. Or the Temple of Time, same thing in Ocarina of Time. You enter this Temple of Time, and there's that shaft of light, there's the Master Sword, and you don't have to be told by Navi that's the Master Sword. You know it is, and you know you're going to go pull that thing. So, yeah, agreed. Lighting is absolutely a key element, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, and as I said, also the tone, the color tones, and the hues that you choose to use to convey how a place feels, to convey a physical sensation or an emotional response.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add to that? Because this reminds me of something that another guest on a different episode of the Blue Room brought up. But before I bring that up, did y'all want to add to anything any of the others have said?
Just that I'm taking lots of notes of things that I need to implement.
You good, AOD? Anything else you'd like to add?
I think they summarized it better than I can. I'm going to bang sticks together and make a fire in the group.
Well, both of your games do have very good, I should say, let's use a superlative, fantastic environmental storytelling, which is one of the reasons y'all were guests. But this reminds me of our level design Blue Room, where JD Sherbert brought up a point that kind of has stuck with me really hard. And that's when you're designing your level, the first thing you should say is, what is the story of that level? What story is that level telling? And not in the sense of what story in relation to your game story, in so much as the story of the level. And you can add into that how that fits into the game story. But like, for example, if you're going through a cave, or you're going through an apartment complex, what story is that level trying to convey? And what I wanted to bring up and talk about is when I'm developing an environment and I'm using any form of environmental storytelling at all, I first and foremost am keeping in my mind, how is that pushing forward the story of the level, and how is that driving the player, pardon me, through the narrative that I'm trying to tell, both level-wise and overall game-wise. And I wanted y'all's thoughts on that. How much do you take into account that story of your level before you even start placing objects and saying, I want a scene here, I want an environmental scene, or whatnot?
I have a funny process of this, because often I will, when designing an area, I have a rough idea of how I want it to look and feel,
Mhm.
and how it pertains to that. And I will have a period that I'll just allocate for experimentation.
Mhm.
So visually, I'll put all my resources and elements together and keep tweaking until I get closer toward the feelings I want to evoke. But sometimes when you're in that process, you accidentally stumble across stuff that you really want to include.
Mhm.
And what's an example? Yeah, so when I was designing an interior of Aaron and Vera's house,
Mhm.
I started to get in the minds of the characters, and I started to think about where they would place certain objects, where they would decorate, and that led to the idea of putting a height measurement of Aaron on the wall, just to show that it's something that they've been tracking, and obviously adding those small elements shows like a level of care and connection that they might not otherwise have. But the point I'm trying to get to is
Mhm.
that like my process is actually trying stuff out and then discovering what that is in the process
Right.
of visually creating the areas.
Mhm.
And then in future areas that use that template, I can kind of run with that and re-implement those things later and move things around and play off the fact that I included them in the original sort of design of the area.
Yeah, and I do want to kind of add on to that for a moment and say creation of any kind is very fluid. And yeah, going back and forth between one narrative element in your head as you're creating something and another is normally part of the creative process. So yeah, it's absolutely a thing that you may have where your starting point is in your designing, but you're going to go all over the place, following your outline maybe a lot, maybe a little, plotting, pantsing as they were, somewhere in the middle. But I agree that, yeah, there's no, like, one set order. But, AOD, Teal, anything you want to add to that?
Dang headset. Okay, so when I'm thinking about the story of an area, I usually begin in very nebulous terms, and I have like a basic. I pretty much just think of like the raw geography of things, and then I decide why is this here, why is this there, and then I slowly specify as I narrow in on my specific area maps and whatnot. And sometimes I will just say, here's a snowy place, and I don't have a reason why. And then later I go, okay, I want this to be a snowy place infested by demons. Wait a minute, how did these things get here? And that was a rabbit hole that took up many, many, many months of my life.
Well, right.
Wait a minute.
Right, and in both of your instances, something that you decided to add opened up new branches of creative brainstorming and pushing levels, overall narratives, etc., in a different direction, and made you even consider things that you hadn't originally considered, which is the organicness of the creative process. Teal, what would you like to add, if anything?
I think they put it very well. I mean, I do a similar thing to Arc is, yeah, I'll put something down. I'll say, okay, well, this obviously needs to be, this is a forest level.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm given in the document, a forest level. Okay, so here's a forest. All right, so I start making the forest and the paths. And I'm like, well, okay, so I have some paths. Where are they going to go? Where are they going to end up? And so that I just start going in that direction. I'm just like, okay, what would be interesting over here? And here's a warren of rabbits. Well, and then I start going, the rabbits and the hawks and
Right.
But it is a very, very fluid process, and I just start with the big picture of what the design document calls for, and then I just start diving into it, and just things come to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the same boat as the three of you. I find I'm a little more structured, at least when I first start a level. When I first start a level, whether I'm working off of a document or not, try to work off of a document as much as possible, I say to everyone. But I'll go ahead and I'll have, what's the story of the level? What is the narrative I'm attempting to tell? What am I trying to guide the player through? And I'll have with that, kind of notes off to the side in the margins. Is there anything that I can use just the environment for? And it's just little scribble scratches. It's not anything detailed planned out, but I do try to keep myself open that as I am designing the different levels, the different parts of the level, as I'm doing any step of the process, from laying out the meshes, I got it, meshes, applying color, if I'm going to use any LUTs or post-processing effects, lighting. And if I see an opportunity, then I'll take it. But I do try to organize enough to where that I go into each level, I have a couple of aspects already decided. I may not know where I want them, but I know that I want to have them. And again, there is no right or wrong way, but I do find myself plotting a little bit of my environmental storytelling. A lot of times it's because I'll have in my head, I really want to do this.
So I'm on board with that. There's no right or wrong way, but it's important that we don't undervalue the use of documentation, because when it comes to storytelling, well, particularly, let's just say the environment, there will be, like I said, I have an experimentation phase, but if I wasn't working to a preconceived level design and general ideas, or an outline, then and you don't give yourself a deadline on that, you can spend way too long on a very small section of your game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's fun, but it's depending on the project you're working on. If it's for you, you might want to indulge in that. But if you have results that you need to produce, then documentation obviously in general is invaluable. But per area, even I will do what you do and scribble down. Even though I know I'm going to experiment, I will definitely have a game plan going in. But in terms of, like you say, where the objects go, and any other sort of vignettes you want to show about your world, that's the space I experiment in. But without an outline, I wouldn't really even know where to start. So
Right.
I think documentation is pivotal.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, given where I'm at and what I'm always preaching, a GDD, even for a solo dev, to me a GDD is extremely important. And what I'll do is I'll take that slice from the GDD, and from there I'll do the documentation thing you were just talking about, where that's my main thing. Then I'll expand upon it with notes, or another chapter within the GDD or whatnot, another section, and then I'll expand more. And then I'll take out my little blue pen. Teal knows I love these little blue pens, and I'll just sit there and mark my notes in, either in the notebook or printed parts of the GDD or whatnot. So yeah, absolutely. AOD, Teal, what do you guys think?
I absolutely agree with Teal and Arc. I'm just going to say this. As the chaotic little gremlin that doesn't know how to keep himself organized, please write down your thoughts and ideas. It really does help. I have caused myself way too much stress and anxiety and frustration by not knowing what I am actually doing half the time.
But you get better as you go, don't you? Like, you've probably found that you've stuck your foot in it, much like I have at one point in time, and go, okay, I need to dial it back, and I need to pull myself in, and then you just develop better methodology and ways of tracking your progress and stuff.
Yeah, it's just taken me way too long to get to that epiphany of, oh hey, if I write things down, I will know what I'm doing later.
But you have done it, and the fact that you've come along that journey just shows that you yourself want to take advantage of those key moments within your game, environmentally speaking.
Mm-hmm.
To how can you take your levels, which are good levels, and punch up where they can bring its uniqueness, its flavor, those little pieces that make it alive, so that it's not just a forest, it's not just an apartment complex, it's not just a ruined bedroom after a murder, but these little pieces that make it a living entity, an organism. And your documentation, your shift to documenting has shown that now you can do it a lot easier. So we have a little bit more to go over, and this is the subject of those little things. Those little things are, to me, super important. And what I want to ask the three of you is, when you're designing those, and when you're creating, when you're crafting, when you're doing the experimentation that Arc is talking about, how much minutia do you get into the placement of objects? And I'm not talking about moving a book over 3 pixels or 3 3D units. I mean, how much do you consider those little pieces? Or do you go, I want to have a book here and I'm going to have a pipe on top of it because it looks good, as opposed to you going, I'm going to have a book here and a pipe on top of it because I want the player to recognize that the father smokes. Things like that.
That's a great question.
Oh, yeah.
That's a great question. Can I think about that? I'll let AOD go.
Absolutely.
The reverse Uno card. I see how this is. Okay, so being completely honest, I tend to end up thinking about things after the fact when I do level design, as far as like storytelling. Like, there is elements where I pre-plan, but I'm very prone to going like, now that I think about this, I could use this as a little nugget of information later. But then there are instances where, from the very beginning, I have a very key frame of reference for what I want a particular area to have.
Right.
For instance, I may, from the very get-go, decide that there's going to be a giant hole on the back of this house, and it goes somewhere, and you can see outside a little bit.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And you can see like claw marks where giant monsters have been attacking and stuff.
Very good. Teal?
I think I'm somewhere between the two extremes that you brought up. I'll start out just putting things in. It's a typical room, so I'll put my different furniture in. Then once it's there, I start thinking about what I want it to say. Is it just going to be a simple room where you go in, you talk to somebody, and you leave, or is it a room that you're going to be investigating because of X or Y? So in the second instance, that's when I start thinking about, laying the pipe on the book, that sort of thing, to call attention to that, or a smashed lantern, or oddly placed lights. So I'm kind of in the middle.
Okay.
As to what you were saying.
Okay.
I'll start off with something and just broad picture, but then I start diving into it and I start moving elements around and tweaking until the story's told that I want to tell in there.
All right. Arc, have you had enough time to think?
Yeah. So it's hard to know how deep to go on it sometimes, and I have to consider how important is the area to the story, how prominently are the people that inhabit this area sort of important to the overall game, and I have to assess it based on feel at the end, and then maybe replay it and see how it comes across. But and that sounds pretty generic, but one more specific point is that I kind of always have two players, two demographics in my head when I'm thinking about how far should I go with this, and that's, would my general audience pick up on it? And that's where I want to focus 80% of my attention. And then the last 20% is, would super fans or really tuned in players that really like the game, would they pick up on this? And you're going to have less of those, but I still want that stuff there for those players. And one example of this is, so toward the start of the game, there are certain flowers you have to follow because they lead the way back to the protagonist's house. And we learned later that these flowers were planted by a member of the family in reference to somebody that's not around anymore. And those flowers are green. And as a way of keeping that person's presence around in the story, I just thought it would be cool to make a lot of the plates and cups and that kind of stuff, and just some elements of the house in a similar green, just so there's that. Maybe even subconsciously you pick up on that, but maybe you don't pick up on it at all. But I know that Nikarasu picked up on it when he played, and I was really chuffed, that somebody picked up on the fact that I'd gone through the effort of the minutiae of recoloring certain cups and stuff in the house just to reflect that.
Good use of color.
So yeah, you can go super in depth with it, and of course you can place objects as well, which would have a similar level of you can use that to the extent that it will have a similar level of enigma or a cryptic nature to it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you just want to you want to make sure that most people can pick up on what you're providing. That where I put most of my attention, and then some of my attention goes into like the really finite small elements.
Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm with you on board there. Now, as someone who has been a tabletop game master for an uncomfortably long time, a lot of times I will find myself falling into the little category of there's a lot of significance in little things. So when I approach it myself, a lot of times when I'm creating those environmental scenes, I will have in the back of my head a little thing which will clue in. Like, for example, you do the flowers and the recoloring of the cups. And I'll go, okay, since I want to have my story come out not just with broad brushstrokes, but for those who are paying attention, those little details that will not just enrich, but perhaps clue in, I will do that as well. So when I'm building my design document, or I'm working off of my design document, a lot of times, like I said, this is the tabletop GM in me going, okay, what can I show my players that the ones that are paying attention will gain a lot of significance, and perhaps give them a predictive ability, to kind of go, I think this thing is what's going on, or this thing here is what's going to happen next. So while I'm definitely with you, Arc, I do find that my GMing does come through a lot in the creation of an environment, for environmental storytelling. So let's kind of start wrapping things up. We got about another 10 minutes, everyone. Let's just kind of open up for discussion to kind of bring everything full circle. When you're using environmental storytelling, just kind of go, and you could talk about your games, guys. So you could talk a little bit about how you do it in Eternal Remnant, Tears of Morgana. Where do you find your biggest challenges are? Is it following this large miasma of unwritten rules that we've all kind of gone over, where there is no right or wrong? Is it just remembering to do it, finding the right assets? Where do you guys find are the biggest challenges for such things like environmental storytelling?
I think kind of the biggest struggle I have is that I don't usually go into things with a ironclad plan, see my entire development history. But I tend to go by the seat of my pants or some such when it comes to these details. But as I'm actually designing the level, I'll start to understand what I'm actually wanting from it. So I'll start with the basic skeleton of the room, but then I'll actually be thinking about what has been going on in this room. What kind of things do I want to be happening here, and how does that affect everything else?
Right.
But until that point, I can have periods where I go, I just don't know what I want this room to do yet. I know I want a waypoint, or I want this big boss room, or etc. But I don't know what I want out of it just yet.
I find it. You've always got to stay fresh with how you deliver something. Staying creative and staying fresh with the environments they create and the type of storytelling that takes place in them. Don't want to broaden that up to storytelling as a whole, because that's staying visually creative is tough.
Right.
And especially in an RPG format where the game is longer, you don't necessarily. You can if you're perhaps the Trails series or something like that, but you can't necessarily. For me, because I've already established a precedent of the scenes operate a certain way, I can't always have 3 plus people around a table discussing a story and leave the scene at that. There needs to be some kind of dynamic motion or visuals to it. So that's probably a bit too broad because it's not environment specific. But I think the biggest challenge is, like I said to you, when I heard the topic, I wanted to revisit some stuff, and I just think it's keeping some kind of track of, or rather, sticking to the system you want to use about what is the emotional depth of this level and where is it going, and what do we want the player to feel, and what is the environment, what information do we need the environment to relay. And just in development, sometimes it's fun just to, or easier even to jump onto the next stage and keep things moving because you want to keep that pace up. But sometimes slowing things down and remembering what your initial processes is really important, so things don't kind of get away from you.
Yeah, I'm going to build off what Ark said. I think my biggest challenge is where I get to, I call stuck points.
Okay.
So, I've designed this room. I'm just going to say it's a room. It's easier for me to talk about a room because I do rooms a lot more than I do outdoor environments this point, but a room. And I've designed it. Hey, it's supposed to be a living room. Great. So I design it. And then I get stuck because I'm like, well, okay, so is there going to be anything in this room that, what little environmental story do we want to tell? What's the story of this room? I get stuck. Okay, so then I figure out, okay, here's the story of the room. This is how it relates to the bigger story. You get that going.
Yeah.
And then I get stuck again because I can't find the right asset I want.
Okay.
So for me, the challenge is getting past my stuck points. And I can encounter a few or a lot. It depends on what it is doing. Yeah.
Right. I do recall one of the big issues you had back when we were doing our RPG Maker NV demo game. You were like, I need to have a cabinet with the back facing the camera so I could put it on the bottom of the map. And it started as an annoyance and became a massive bone of contention. And I do recall that. So yeah, a stuck point could be anything, including asset related. I'm with you there. Myself personally, I keep forgetting sound is a thing. And I know JD would kill me if he heard that. But I keep forgetting sound is a thing. And I want to make all of my environmental storytelling visual. And while, it's important to have your lighting and your use of the color, that one or two good sounds could change the entire tone of what you're doing. And to me, that's where I constantly have to have notes. Don't forget sound steal. Don't forget sound steal. Don't forget that music. Don't forget those effects. Freesound.org is a good site. And that's where that's my challenge.
I think those are pretty. I empathize with both of the things you guys just said as well. Finding an asset you think you originally wanted for your environment can be really hard when you don't have a pixel artist or an artist on board to create that asset for you. Sometimes you need to bend but not break and change that asset a little bit because you can't find the right thing that fits in with your art style. And then on the sound side of it, Teal, I found that I've had to go back and do entire sound passes over the game, and just to make sure that every, with that sole concentration, nothing else, just making sure the effects are in the right place, that the volume levels are right, that the transitions are good, just to make sure that, because I'm the same, I create everything visually first and sound is secondary. So to make sure that that it doesn't drop off a cliff, I just have to go and do it again. Yeah,
that's one of the reasons why a good sound engineer for a AAA or even a good indie title is like the golden goose right there. Because having a good sound anything it cannot be undervalued and it cannot be overstated. Would you like to add anything to any of that, especially since you do put such an emphasis to music, AOD?
I tend to find as kind of more of a player's spectrum of things when it comes to storytelling, I get super distracted whenever I notice there is some kind of disturbance in the audio side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I pick up on it very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, say, if there's a boss fight and there's like all this hype, and then I just hear, say, generic boss theme again, I'm like, well, that goes all the hype for this super special character that we've been building up for the entire game. You don't even have, like, something fitting for the occasion.
Xenosaga Episode 1, where everything is the same music until you fight the final boss. Yeah.
I think there was actually a video game that you guys played back when you did like the critical review let's plays.
Critical plays.
I forget the title you used.
Critical
Yeah.
play.
Dragon Quest? I think it was Dragon Quest. I remember this one boss fight, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be fun. And it was still the generic boss theme, but I was like, how cool would it be if, when it's all dancing, there's like actual dance remix of the boss theme or something funny like that.
Yeah, that would have been good.
It's things like that I think about as a player. Like, man, that would have been really cool if it had like this special thing going on.
One of the things I absolutely love about Final Fantasy XIV is the fact that every major story boss has its own battle theme. I absolutely love that about the game. Okay, so Quix asks, what site did I mention? freesound.org. You just create an account, log in, and they have a plethora of sound effects. All right, we are getting to the end. Unless someone else has something they want to add, we can start wrapping this up. Good. Okay. Let's give our guests a chance, if they wish, to talk a little bit about their project and kind of get a chance to plug. I'll start with you, AOD, and then start with you, Arc, and then we'll wrap it up for the night.
So my projects I'm currently working on is Shattered Realms, Mortal Tale, and sorry.
You're fine.
I get too focused on things. Anyway, my games I'm working on are Shattered Realms, Mortal Tale, and Tears of Morgana. They're both made in RPG Maker MZ, and they take very different approaches to the combat and overall style. One is more of your traditional old school RPG, where it's, the face portraits and so on and so forth. And Tears of Morgana is going into a more agility-based system and whatnot, and there's a lot more tactical gameplay going on in that one.
My game is called Eternal Remnant. It's a narrative-driven game. If you like narrative games and you haven't had the opportunity to play it, the demo is on Steam. If you like it or like the look of it, a wish list goes a long way in helping out for the Steam algorithm, so consider that. But yeah.
Absolutely. All right, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our viewers, of course, and I want to thank our guest panelists, AOD, Arcfinder. Of course, I want to thank my lovely co-host, Teal. This has been the first time that we've done the Blue Room in quite some time. We took a hiatus to work on other projects, but the Blue Room will be every third Monday of every month. We'll bring in different panelists, talk about a different aspect of game development, and through organic conversation, come up with some really good points. And I feel like we came up with some amazing points tonight. Things that hopefully you all watching, you can, of course, developer take note and enhance your own game design. So I want to thank you guys. I want to thank the audience, and I think it's time to get going. So give me a second here. I do want to thank people for the technical issues and kind of bearing with us on this. This is our first time doing this in a while, and I think we did just fine. So any feedback in the comments section would be really appreciated. All right, are y'all ready to call it for the night? All ready to go? All right, let's do this. All right, if you like what you saw, smack down that like button below, subscribe to our channel, consider supporting us on Patreon, connect with us over social media. We will see you in the next video. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.